if I believed what the president believed, that he can use American might to push China around, the opposite just happened. And realize there's something deeper than that. You can't unring the bell. We've had the most bellicose American president ever, and hopefully ever, try to beat China up. And China has shown it's got us by the short and curlies, and we cannot exert that leverage. That leverage is gone now forever.
Hi, I'm Fergus Macphee, and welcome to the Trump Report on Times Radio. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on our YouTube channel, and you can also listen and follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Now, today on the show, we're going to be talking a little bit about tariffs, and that means that there's only one man for the job. Joining me today, as always, is Justin Wolfers, Professor of Public Policy and Economics at the University of Michigan. Justin, how are you?
Fergus, I do know some economics other than tariffs, mate. We can go wherever you want. But yeah, apparently tariffs are what I do now.
Well, I'm sure we will cover a little bit. I might have a few questions up my sleeve, so to keep you on your toes.
Great.
We will start, though, with Donald Trump and President Xi. Now, Justin, I don't want to misquote you, but you've been saying on this show, I think, a few times that you've been urging Donald Trump to get on the phone to President Xi and talk to him about tariffs and the US's economic relationship with China. He's done one better. He's met him in person.
Isn't it amazing? I hope they got a photo together, maybe an autograph, maybe a tchotchke to put on the mantelpiece. Maybe he even came back with a trade deal. It was a really interesting meeting for two reasons. One, for what Trump thought he got, and two, for a completely different subject, what actually happened. Often those are meant to overlap, but in this case, they don't at all. Trump has declared this an immense success. He's gotten the US access to rare earth minerals. He's gotten the Chinese to promise to send less fentanyl across the border. And he's gotten them to promise, I think, to buy 12 million metric tons of soybeans. These are all dimensions in which this week America's business relations with China look enormously better than last week.
Is that the crux of where you stand with it? It looks, I think you did a post on X, you said it's better than last week, but it's still maybe not as good as it was from sort of going back to April 2025.
Yeah, so how should we judge what someone does? Is it that this week is better than last week, or is it better than how they found it? I'm going to say we should judge this better than how they found it. Basically, this is, classic Trump, which is screw it up and then screw it up a little bit less and declare victory because you improved things. So first of all, soybeans, we are now going to sell soybeans again to China. They're actually going to buy them. I think the commitment is 12 million metric tons for this year, if I recall. It was 24 million in 2024 that they bought. And there's commitments to buy in the future as well, back closer to those earlier levels. But basically, he's gotten the Chinese to agree to buy fewer soybeans than they were previously buying. Now, they might exceed those commitments. That'd be terrific. Lovely. Terrific. Rare earth minerals. Fergus, I don't know if you remember this, but way back, boy, probably before you and I ever met, because we only ever met over the Trump tariffs, but there was a period a year ago when economists could go their whole lives without talking about rare earth minerals. So could journalists, and so could your audience. Your audience didn't need to understand the full table of elements. There are certain magnets that are really important for manufacturing. They're called rare earth minerals. They're not actually rare, it turns out. They're just hard to get, and the Chinese are good at getting them. We didn't have any problems because when American companies wanted them, they would call Chinese companies and buy them. And you and I didn't need to know a darn thing about it. Until Trump decided to start a trade war, the Chinese government said stop selling them. And all of a sudden, America realized that its factories could come to a halt because President Xi was unhappy with President Trump. So we now have access to rare earth minerals on paper for a year. Now, we had access before. We also have the extension of their truce. Now, you're like, what the heck is a truce in the never-ending trade war? So before Trump came to power, we had tariffs on China, around about 20%. Then Trump came to power and he imposed a 20% fentanyl tariff on China. They weren't doing enough to stop fentanyl coming into the United States. Then we had Liberation Day, and he imposed a 30-something% tariff, maybe 40-something% tariff. Then we had 90 deals in 90 days, none of which happened, blah, blah, blah. But there was an escalation of the trade war during that period that saw our tariff on China go all the way up to 145%, which is effectively an embargo. They did the same. And so they both realized that this wouldn't work, so they declared a truce. Now, the truce is from tariffs so high, you're cutting the two economies off from each other. So they declared a truce where we could get back to business, albeit with high tariffs. They declared that truce. Then I think roughly 3 weeks later, each was worried that the other was cheating. This doesn't sound like the healthiest relationship. So they got together again, and they decided to agree that the truce they'd agreed to, they were going to agree to again. That truce formally runs out on November 10. It's very easy for Americans to make plans for their future because we do get to plan all the way through to several weeks ahead sometimes. For the American viewers, that was sarcasm. Actually, maybe we need like a signal or something, Fergus. Okay, so that, and then Trump got upset in the middle of that truce. Maybe reasonably, maybe not, who the hell knows, and declared on a Friday a couple of weeks ago he was going to impose another 100% tariff on China, which again effectively says turn the boats around. Markets tanked, and by Monday he remembered he didn't really mean it. But rather than actually revoke it, he just sort of did what he did, which is posted through it. This whole has middle school cafeteria vibes to it, doesn't it? So we never actually put that 100% tariff on. So now they finally got in the room and they talk to each other and they're like, you know what, we should actually trade with each other. Good idea. We can't do it if we've got 100% tariff. So then they've extended their truce. So the truce that they were worried wasn't a truce that they retruced. They're now retrucing it. And they're saying this now is a truce for another year, which is very exciting, except for the last truce was a 3-month truce and they broke it twice, suggesting that the enormous certainty that American business craves of getting 12 months of understanding what our relationship looks like with the world's second largest economy. Apparently, we're safe for another year. Fergus, I'm going to place a bet with you. How about I bet you a 6-pack of beer that you have me back on the show within the next 12 months to talk about ongoing tariff struggles with China? I reckon it's going to happen. Of course, you would have the president's word on your side.
I won't be taking that bet, but I'm sure we will have you on again within the next year. I think the headline figure is that the US tariffs on China have been reduced from 57 to 47%. Is that a 10% cut?
It's actually a lot more interesting than that. Okay, great. So I want you to say what the headlines are again, because I think it's important that our audience understands the headline. Then I'm going to explain to them the truth.
Well, that's the thing. And my question was going to be headline figures are 57% to 47% cut, so a 10% cut. And I was going to say, I mean, is that actually a meaningful de-escalation, or is that kind of a pause in the?
It's actually a substantial de-escalation, even larger than that. And so there's two ways of looking at this, and it's very complicated. So when I'm standing on this side of the room, I'm going to bring my microphone with me. This is Justin, the economist. You can tell there's an economics textbook behind me. I think that high tariffs, high taxes on Americans who buy stuff from China is bad. So anytime you reduce it, I think that's good. When I'm on this side of the room, this is Justin talking about the Trump administration's view of the world. The Trump administration thinks that we should tariff China highly, and the higher it is, the more we win. And if they got our tariffs down, they won and we lost. Let me start in the center with the facts. Okay. The facts are that we had 20% tariffs on China before any of this. If your listeners have ever heard any tariff numbers over the last 11 months that we've been doing, 10 months we've been playing this game, they've all been changes since the Trump administration came to power. So that was a baseline no one talked about. So there was 20, then we added 20 for fentanyl, and then we added 34 for Liberation Day. So 20 plus 20 is 40, plus 34 is 74. And Trump now is saying we're at 47, but what he's doing is building in the original 20 no one talked about. So there was a number that mattered, we just never talked about it. And he's now talking about it to make it sound like tariffs are high. So he's over here and he's saying, hey, man, tariffs are 47%. Now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to say, actually, this is a much larger reduction than you ever thought of. And I think that's good. Back to the facts. The facts live right here. So there were 3 sets of tariffs: pre-existing, fentanyl, Liberation Day. Pre-existing still exist, 20. Fentanyl, he cut in half to 10%. China said, we don't like it. And he said, okay. So when I'm standing over here, I'm like, fantastic, good job. You got rid of 10% of these dumb tariffs. I'm so pleased. When you're over here, you're like, you just got played. You went to China and they got you to cut the fentanyl tariffs in half just by asking. The revenue's not going to come in. You're not beating up China, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's one half of the story.
That also would fly directly in the face, would it not, to the tough stance on bringing fentanyl into the country?
Right, over here. Where's your balls, mate? You went over, you were going to beat up this guy, you could make a deal, and you've come back and you've cut tariffs on China. Okay, that's the second reality. I want to come back to the center now. The center is where the baseline tariffs, fentanyl tariffs were halved, and then there's the Liberation Day tariffs. The president has been unbelievably unclear about this. And so it's actually impossible to know what the facts are based on what he said, because this is diplomacy by tweet or by Truth Social post. We don't have an executive order. We don't have an American readout of the meeting, anything. So what I have is commentators who read Chinese reading the Chinese readout. I can't vouch for them because that's not a thing I normally do. But if we're at 47, if it's 20 baseline plus 10 fentanyl, that means we're at 16 or 17 on reciprocal. Actually, just because of the rounding, the answer is 16. Okay, so this is when Trump stood up on Liberation Day. I forget what the early one was, but on Liberation Day Mark II, he said, we're going to hit the Chinese with 34%. That's what's necessary to rebalance the economies. That's down to 16. So China really got what China wanted, right? So it knocked 10 off, and then it knocked this down to 16. The European Union's at 15. One of our closest allies is being treated 1 percentage point better. This is astonishing that the group that Trump is most wanting to be at war with, in fact, is now being treated almost on par with our allies. So let me come to be Justin the Economist. Justin the Economist says it's remarkable. It's remarkable that we have now gotten tariffs with China down this far, and that's terrific. And actually, it's also what's even more remarkable is the more that the president is bellicose about a country, in fact, the lower the tariffs. The other great example is, who else does he hate? Canada. And he yells and screams about Canada, but every time you read that he's doubled tariffs on Canada or added this to Canada or this and that, the thing to remember is there's a free trade agreement with Canada and they're recognizing it. And so basically, if your goods are certified as being compliant with the rules of that trade agreement, which the Americans call USMCA, then the tariff is 0. 2 years ago, most goods weren't compliant for the simple reason that most tariffs were so close to 0, no one wanted to do the paperwork. Then Trump raised the tariffs and everyone called a trade lawyer. They've done the paperwork. And now 80 or 90% of American trade with Canada is UMCA compliant, which is to say at a tariff of 0. So what happens is Trump goes to rallies and screams things out loud, which is about only 10% of Canadian goods. And the reality is 80 or 90% is actually at 0. So Canada's in a great spot right now. And then the second fact I just told you is China's in a really good spot right now. So what we're actually seeing is the average level of tariffs is sneaking down, even as the level of bellicosity is sneaking up. So Justin the Economist is thrilled. Let me now just come over and think about if I were a Maganaut. If I had a different view of the economy, I don't. But if I thought that tariffs are an important way of rebalancing trade, I would be profoundly upset that we're not tariffing Canada and that the Chinese have managed to beat up Trump by threatening rare earths and uh, by through the they've managed to beat up Trump with the rare earths and the soybeans. That's the word I was looking for. Honestly, I remember the days we didn't have to think about our favorite different agricultural products. I used to just talk about it as agricultural output, but they've used rare earths and soybeans to beat the president into submission. And now China is being treated better than many of our allies. Let me come back to just talking about the facts.
So China is thrilled. Justin, the Economist, is thrilled. Now, Donald Trump said on a scale of 0 to 10, he'd rate this deal 12.
He should rate it a -2 on a Trump scale, right? If I believed what the president believed, that he can use American might to push China around, the opposite just happened. And realize there's something deeper than that. You can't unring the bell. We've had the most bellicose American president ever, and hopefully ever, try to beat China up. And China has shown it's got us by the short and curlies, and we cannot exert that leverage. That leverage is gone now forever.
In terms of bargaining chips, you've talked about the rare earth minerals there, which China certainly used. One thing that I didn't really see talked about a lot in any of the readouts. Are you surprised the US didn't use sort of NVIDIA and semiconductor chips?
So part of the problem is we don't have a clear readout on what happened. So let me just bring the audience in on this conversation. So the US has these amazing chips that are central to AI, and China doesn't. And so our equivalent of a rare earth mineral is a highly valuable chip. And so the US has regulated, has said that we can't really sell that many over there. Remember, Trump backed off somewhat when he said you can if you give the US government 15%, which is a funny way of running national security. And this was very much on the table whether we would go further and open up even greater access to American chips. I saw some reactions from some folks who are national security folks saying he's given away too much. But again, we don't have a readout. So it's possible there's very little. It's possible there's quite a lot. It's also possible the White House framing is wrong. So a lot of the framing from national security types is this is like an arms race, that if they get AI, we don't, and that's bad for the world. I don't think that's obviously the case. If we were talking about literally an arms race, if we had a geopolitical enemy, we wouldn't want them to have any nuclear weapons because they can only use nuclear weapons to destroy us. But these are not nuclear weapons. This is large language models. These are computer chips. These are ways of discovering how better to process information. And if China learns how to do that, that doesn't stop America from doing it. And it may even help America do it. So it's not remotely obvious to me that thinking about AI in the context of sort of a great powers dialogue makes any sense.
I want to, now that we're on the topic, I want to ask you something. This is slightly off track, but in terms of AI, I do a show called The Tech Report on the Times Radio Tech YouTube channel. A reminder to anyone watching this video, please go and subscribe to that YouTube channel.
You're a talented journalist.
So going on to AI, like I said, it's a little off topic, but you talk a lot on the Tech Report about the so-called AI bubble. I'm not going to ask you from a tech journalist point of view, but from an economist point of view, do you think America is currently in a bubble?
I think anyone who answers that question is guilty of malpractice. It's fine for you to ask it, but in order for me to look you in the eye and say it's a bubble, I have to say there's all these people investing trillions, not even billions, trillions of dollars in this technology, and they're looking at spreadsheets and complicated models and financial models, and there's accountants and economists and statisticians looking at all of this. That's what goes into like a stock valuation. And I have to say, all those people are overpricing, say, the stock of NVIDIA. And they're all dumb and they don't understand it, and I do. Do you see the degree of hubris it takes to call something a bubble? So, by the way, do realize everyone who says, I know it's a bubble, that's someone sort of identifying they're a prick, or at least remarkably overconfident. So I will never look you in the eye and call this a bubble with certainty. Now, different question. Could it be a bubble? Yeah, absolutely. What are some things we know about bubbles? Well, we know they create extremely high valuations. It's definitely that. But a bubble really is when you're creating valuations that are not commensurate with the economic fundamentals. Now, that's actually a much harder case to make. Let's do a little bit of arithmetic, you and I, Fergus. In a decade's time, what percent of jobs could be done by AI?
25%, 30%?
Okay, you're at the optimistic end. That's fine. So let's take 25%. US GDP is $30 trillion. So, and by the way, most of the value of a stock is the future, right? So I'm just going to forget about the next 10 years. We're doing very rough math, right? So US GDP per capita, US GDP is 30 trillion. If you knock out 25% of the jobs, then we're at 7 trillion per year. Now you could say labor's only half of that, so we'll knock that down to 4 trillion per year forever. What's your discount rate? Which is to say, what's the interest rate, the real inflation-adjusted interest rate we should use to think about the value of a future stream of earnings? Make up a number.
5%.
Okay, so that means if I want to think about the NPV, what I want to do is multiply by 20. Now I'm at 80 trillion, and so far I've only talked about the American economy. What's the value of the Magnificent Seven? It's below 80 trillion. I know that. It's below it by a lot. So, and if I think about, the US a fifth of the global economy, so now I want to go from 80 trillion to 400 trillion. All of a sudden, breaking news, leading tech journalist Fergus Macphee says AI is tremendously undervalued by trillions of dollars, right? So there's a story in which it could be true. And there's a story, in fact, if I really believed your story, buying AI stocks would be immensely profitable. So you should be going long. So could it be a bubble? Yes. Could it be not a bubble? Also, yes.
That was a very diplomatic answer. I'm glad we covered it. Thank you for talking about that.
Mate, it's an honest answer, though. I get that, not being a confident bloke who looks you in the eye and stares and says, I know exactly what's going on, makes for great journalism, makes for it's for your audience. They deserve the truth. And the truth is, anyone who's confident is lying to you. I'm confident about that. Ooh, Schrodinger's confidence.
We will just end then with where we started, and we'll go back to the start of that meeting between Trump and Xi. Now, I never really know how much you can realistically read into diplomacy done for the cameras, but both of them sort of said that they were pleased that the two countries were continuing to be partners and friends, etc., etc. Is the fact that they have met this week a sign of some progress?
Well, if they hadn't, I guess we'd say it was the opposite of progress. So relative to not meeting, no. But if what you really wanted was deep integration, deep partnerships, it's not enough to go meet a bloke and shake his hand. You have to do things like admit Chinese students into the United States, stop saying explicitly racist things, stop using China as, by the way, I don't think China's an obvious and complete ally. It's a very complicated relationship. And it just got more complicated when you layer on someone who believes in personality-driven diplomacy and who is moodier than a teenage, than a love-struck teenager.
Justin Wolfers, thank you so much for joining us as always on the Trump Report.
A pleasure.